Welcome back, everyone. Here we are at 2 o'clock, going strong, and we're really excited about this session today. Um, really focusing on community impact and mobilizing social movements. It's really looking more macro um, movements around the intersection of social justice, human rights, and how mentoring really connects into that. I'm going to be passing it on to Professor McGarry, Jenny from UConn and sport management, um, amazing mentor and leader in the field of inclusion and diversity and leadership in sport. So it's really an honor to have Jenny with us to help facilitate. Mary and I will sort of be in the background, and we're just honored to have Lauren with the Women's Sports Foundation and with Athlete Ally, and also Phaidra, amazing leader, advocate, ally. And so really this is a tremendous gathering here. And so I'm gonna pass it on to Jenny to take us away.
Thanks so much, Eli. Thanks, Mary. It's great to be here for another session after some amazing sessions yesterday and today, and a few more left to come. Given the short amount of time that we have together in this session, I'm going to have each of the panelists talk a little bit more about themselves and introduce themselves. So I'll just give you brief introductions and then ask a first question that will hopefully tell you or allow them to tell you a little bit more about themselves. So first we have Lauren Lubin April with the Women's Sport Foundation, where she's the Senior Director of Community Impact. Next we have Ann Lieberman, who's with Athlete Ally, Ann, the Director of Policy and Programs. And we also have Phaidra Knight, who shows up as Lauren's double here on the Zoom, who's a former international rugby player and Hall of Famer, and most recently has founded Peak Unleashed, which is a youth leadership organization. And we hope to hear a little bit more about that while we're on the session today. So Lauren, if you don't mind getting us started, telling us a little bit more about your background, and by way of introducing yourself, if you have any stories of a mentor's impact in your life to this point, that would be great for the audience to hear as well. It seems like a common thread throughout these conversations.
Absolutely. Well, thank you once again for having me here today. And I'll start out by saying what an honor for me to share a name with the one and only Phaidra Knight here today. Phaidra and I go way back, personal friends, but anyway, I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to try and condense this as much as possible. I would have to say, being a lifelong athlete myself, I would just have to attribute sports as being one of the greatest mentors and in roles of mentorship in my life, through so many opportunities from coaches, teammates, players, both formally and informally. But as I said, you know, my whole life I've been an athlete. I was a former basketball player at the University of Colorado, turned marathoner, and now my life has led me into sports as Senior Director of Community Impact at the Women's Sports Foundation. I oversee our Athlete Leadership Division, which provides programming, resources, and outreach to our extensive network of champion athletes and ambassadors, such as Phaidra Knight joining us today, who is an integral player in our foundation's work. Additionally, I oversee our youth programming, which provides funding, resources, and tools to help create and maintain sustainability and growth at the grassroots level. And I would have to say probably the core work that I do at the Women's Sports Foundation and Community Impact is really bridging the gap between both arms through mentorship opportunities to help strengthen and grow the pipeline for girls and women in sports. Prior to that, I was 7 years in film as a film producer and founded We Exist Beyond the Binary, which was a film and movement dedicated to advancing access and equality for people who exist and identify outside the binary. And for myself, I can say played a big role as both a mentee and a mentor in that space, learning the ropes, but then helping really pave the way for others for social progress.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Anne, would you like to go next, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So just very briefly, for those of you who might not know Athlete Ally, we are also a nonprofit organization, and we work to dismantle the structures of oppression that isolate, endanger LGBTQI plus people in sport. And so we do that in three primary ways: through education, sport policy, and athlete activism. And my journey through sport has been a very interesting one. I grew up doing martial arts, a martial art called Tang Soo-do, which is a Korean martial art similar to Taekwondo. Did that until I was about 15, played team sports very badly in high school, and then found my way back to martial arts, to Muay Thai specifically, which is similar to American style kickboxing, but in addition to your hands and feet, you can use your elbows and knees to strike. And, you know, similar to Lauren, Muay Thai has been my mentor in many ways throughout the past 10 years. And I've been so lucky to have amazing coaches and teammates throughout that process. And I think one of the things that I would love us to think about when we think about mentorship today is that often we think about mentorship in a very structured way. And mentorship is also about moments. There are so many different moments in our lives through colleagues, teammates, peers, where we can learn something really profound and take it into our everyday life. And a quick example of that for me actually happened yesterday when Phaidra and I were on a panel together, and we had asked the panelists to wrap up by giving some words of advice, encouragement, and wisdom. And Phaidra was saying some really amazing things and said, "There will be daylight." And I said in that panel, I said, I'm going to write that down and put it on a Post-it note. And it is on my computer. And so that's, I think, just an example of you can take things in small ways and in big ways and apply them to your life.
Thanks, Anne. So you want to follow that up, Phaidra? It sounds like you are quite the mentor, even when you don't know it, right?
Well, that's great. I appreciate that. You know, and like you, Anne, I constantly find moments of enlightenment from the people around me. I think everyone around me serves as a mentor, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Yes, I'm Phaidra Knight, and I have played sports pretty much all my life. There's a picture of me on my parents' mantle. I think I wasn't even 1 year old, and I had a ball in my hand. I was drooling, but I had a ball in my hand. And so, you know, it was a metaphor for what would serve to be the rest of my life, a lifelong athlete. And I guess the bulk of my athletic career has been devoted to the sport of rugby, which has been, much like the two of you, provided so much mentorship. The people, the values of the sport, the game itself has been such a lesson for me. And so I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be here to talk today about this a bit more. I am also the founder of Peak Unleashed, which is a 501c3 that I founded back in January of 2019. We're primarily focused on the physical and personal development of marginalized youth. And our focal point up to this point has been primarily working with incarcerated young folks. More recently, I founded a for-profit venture with very nonprofit type intentions in terms of social justice called the PSK Collective. And it's essentially it's a lifestyle brand, but its current manifestation is we'll be launching a clothing line and later in August. And we are a collective. PSK is a collective of female athletes right now, folks who, aren't necessarily Venus or Serena Williams, but certainly put in the work and the time into their sport, and just haven't been maybe marketed in the way that they deserve. And so this platform was created to bring more exposure to the athletes, more exposure to women athletes, and to create a forum for mentorship for Gen Z athletes, and obviously these athletes that we have as ambassadors. And so, yeah, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to pay it forward through both of these mechanisms. My latest endeavor, and akin to Anne, and happy to call her, she's not a club mate, but certainly someone who I train alongside many times, is I've staked my ground to become an MMA world champion. So I've been training for mixed martial arts for the last roughly 13 months. And the hope in that, and the big part of the push and motivation in doing that, is to really create a significant platform to focus on some of these social justice and social injustice issues. My life is now dedicated to that fight. And so I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see that Aaron posted the link to Peak Unleashed in the chat, so I appreciate as things come up in the conversation that folks who are listening in have those resources at their fingertips. Phaidra, I appreciate everything that you just said. You actually started to dive into my second question already, and that was, something that in your organization that you're excited about related to mentorship, and particularly for girls, women, and those who identify beyond the binary, as Lauren has done a lot of work in that area. Is there anything else besides what you've already told us about that you want to add, that you're excited about right now, that you're working on?
Well, with COVID, this is the thing, the focal point for us since our inception has been incarcerated youth. We are in several facilities in the tri-state area currently. With the strike of COVID-19, it sort of put things on hold for us from an in-person delivery perspective. We were also had laid out for 2020 to expand our reach. Many of the kids that are in these facilities are boys. There are a handful of girls, and we do work with a number of girls, but our goal was to increase and match the number of do an equal match of gender, to match the same the number of boys that we're working with to the number of girls that we want to work with. But overall, right, we have had the opportunities to work with these girls, and the cool thing about the organization is, I think one of the biggest things I have gained through mentorship is really self-awareness. Being able to hear the stories and see the journey of other people who have sort of walked that road or walked their own path has helped me to create my own vision. It's given me the confidence, and so I think through Peak, what we want to offer these kids, especially this demographic of kids, is a vision, right? We are all mentors when we walk into these facilities, even if we never speak a word about it, right? We play rugby with these kids right now. We bring them, we basically offer rugby and yoga currently. And, it's just being able to engage, being in their presence, energetically connecting with these kids is powerful. It's mentorship within itself. And so, when you add on just teaching them and helping them develop self-regulation and offering tools for stress management and things of that nature, it's just icing on the cake. And so, we regard it as very important. Team building is something very powerful and very effective in that dynamic. So yeah, that's our goal, is just to have a lasting effect. And we don't spend the average kid we're working with anywhere from a couple of months to maybe 12 months, right? The point is to just have a lasting impact while we're in there, and then connect with them when they get out, and further connect them to other mentors within the rugby community, within the yoga community, and outside of that, so that they can have the best shot at being successful. As far as PSK Collective goes, obviously we're still ramping up, but our mission is essentially similar, right? It's to be able to bring to these young women their role models, to make them accessible, and to create a forum where mentorship can happen, because we understand the importance of it and the role it's played in getting us to the places that we are. So that's essentially what we're offering in the things that I'm involved with right now. And it's been very powerful. It's been very, very life-changing for me. Speaking back to what Ann mentioned, and how you can just be inspired by people just on panels. I am constantly inspired and mentored by the kids that I work with, right? Just I don't know who's benefiting more, me or them. And so I think if we regard every opportunity as an opportunity to learn and grow, life is rich. And it's just been a wonderful experience with Peak and with the collective so far.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing and hearing about like the meaning. For all of you, it seems that you've found ways and made ways to take the things that you're passionate about, the things that have impacted you in your lives and your experiences, and turn them into your life's work. So really appreciative that you're sharing those with us today. Anne, would you like to kind of reverse the order? Anne, would you like to talk a little bit more about a particular initiative or effort that you're involved in with work right now that involves mentorship and that really excites you?
The mentorship work that Athlete Ally does is informal rather than formal. And so we have an athlete ambassador program with over 350 pro Olympic, Paralympic athletes. And we also have over 35 college chapters on campuses across the country. And in 2019, we started holding student athlete activism summits, and we had our first one in May of 2019. We're still in this COVID moment exploring virtual software, trying to figure out how we do that and have it be engaging for some of our student athletes. But the thing that was so incredibly powerful about that summit was this was the first time many of our chapters were meeting one another, and we also, through relationships with other athletic departments that heard about the summit, wanted to send student athletes who weren't necessarily a part of an Athlete Ally chapter. And so we saw this amazing moment where the student athletes were coming together. They were sharing strategies about, what had worked and what hadn't worked on campus in terms of activism and organizing, how they found mentorship with athletic directors or coaches, and how they leveraged those relationships to create change on campus. And it was so powerful to see that unfold before our eyes. And then, I think in the nonprofit space, people say, oh, we go to these conferences or we have these convenings, then what actually happens? And that moment that those students took to connect resulted in, so last month, some of our student athletes from our Washington University chapter organized over 500 student athletes to speak out against HB 500 in Idaho, which is a horrific piece of legislation that passed on the eve of Transgender Day of Visibility and just came into law last week, I believe. And, you know, calling on the NCAA to move championship games out of Idaho in 2021. And they organized that letter and got 500 student athletes, over 500 student athletes to sign on in less than 4 days. And that was because they had made a Slack channel from the convening. They reached out to folks on the Slack channel. They posted on Facebook. They had all these networks from, you know, not only the convening that we held, but primarily from that moment. And so it was so powerful to see those students having connected in May of last year, using those connections to make national headlines. And so that is a beautiful example of that. And so we are looking to continue that work. And I think, again, just the power that we've already been speaking to of those informal moments for the peer-to-peer mentorship are so incredible, because things like that massive movement happen.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you sharing that, the informal nature and the ways that people find mentors or create mentorship opportunities out of what presents itself, and what they care about, and how they connect across those things. Lauren, would you like to share something that you're excited about that you're working on right now?
One of my hallmarks is talking on mute on Zoom. So you all were able to experience that live. I'm actually really happy to talk about this because, as Anne mentioned, there are so many informal opportunities of mentorship within the Women's Sports Foundation. However, we do have some formal mentoring programs as well. And just to backtrack a little bit, the Women's Sports Foundation was founded over 45 years ago by Billie Jean King. And as you can imagine, the history and lineage of incredible champions, both on and off the pitch, of women in sport who have been a part of the Women's Sports Foundation, including past president Layla Ali, Jessica Mendoza, Angela Ruggiero, Angela Hucles, now Alina Nichols, who's our president now, and the inherent mentorship that just comes through being a part of that history, as Phaidra knows, who has come through the ranks of the Women's Sports Foundation as well, who now sits on our board and plays a big leadership role within the Women's Sports Foundation. There's so many moments, as Anne said, of just mentorship that happens in our day-to-day work that is involved with such amazing leaders. And as we know, mentorship happens from the top down. Billie Jean King being still playing such a big role within the work that we do at the Women's Sports Foundation. However, as I said, with the community impact, and specifically the work that I do with my team, is we have two arms, so to speak. We have our athlete leadership division, and we have our grassroots, our youth programming, and we do have formal programming and mentorship opportunities that we run throughout the year. I would say on the athlete side, one of our big conferences that we run annually is our Athlete Leadership Connection, which inherently connects champion athletes and student athletes together for a day of leadership training, talking about sometimes some of the most pressing issues that women and girls face in sports. And we'll have guest speakers. Phaidra is a guest speaker, but oftentimes, multiple Olympic medalists, along with leaders in different industry, talking with this closed group about what is necessary to advance and move women forward, and what is necessary for us to address. Additionally, we will provide opportunities to network and really meet with leaders within industries across multiple sectors. As we all know, women in sport once their career ends, it's not the same as when men end their careers. You know, there's an immediate action that needs to be taken oftentimes, because compensation, as we're still working towards equity and equality, is not something you can just fall back on. So we really create opportunities for mentorship and networking for our champion athletes to really think forward as they're either winding down in their career, retiring, or even at the beginning as to addressing the athlete holistically. Additionally, we have a student athlete mentoring program with NBC Sports Group, which is a very formal mentoring program which pairs student athletes with professionals at NBC who are in a line of work that potentially these student athletes want to transition into outside of college. So again, student athletes oftentimes feel like they're at a disadvantage because they don't have the same opportunities that a lot of their peers have, either going abroad or having internships, because they're so committed to their craft, that this is an opportunity to provide hands-on mentorship and working experiences to these student athletes to prepare them for that next level. And then finally, I would have to say the merging of the two arms is our Athlete Ambassador Program, which connects our champion athletes directly to our grassroots program. And so it's a wonderful way to create opportunities that may never exist for an Olympian to go into a soccer practice and show their medal and talk to these girls and really provide this direct impact that wouldn't happen in your day-to-day. Our Athlete Ambassador Program at this point has impacted over 5,000 youth or girls across the nation, hundreds of athletes. It's only just continuing to grow, and I think is the best example of not only mentorship, but the work that we do within the Women's Sports Foundation to really build that pipeline and ensure that there is strong leadership, mentorship, and give back to the younger generations to help advance girls and women in sport.
Thank you. We certainly are getting a lot of information about programs and initiatives through this conversation, so I appreciate you all sharing all that you did. Something that's struck me, and I mentioned it briefly in terms of how each of you has been able to take the things that you care about and work for them in your jobs themselves. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit more about your own activism and how you see that intersecting with your professional roles and the work that you're doing every day. And I'll let you all decide, whoever talks first gets to go first on this one. So jump in if you're ready.
I'm happy to take the lead here. I'm still unmuted. You know, I think I'm an activist by nature. It's something that I can't separate myself from. Similarly, how I can't separate myself from being an athlete. It's just an expression of who I am. And I would have to say, you know, I was actually just reading something prior to this about Maya Moore, and there's a great piece that came out about her saying that her name needs to be up there with Muhammad Ali, with Colin Kaepernick. What she sacrificed is so much greater, right? The risk that she took being a woman athlete, and on top of her game was just tremendous. And so the reason why I preface that is because we're in a time in sports right now where activism is in sports, and that intersection has never been more conjoined than it is today. And when we really recognize this current position that we're in, I think that there's the next 5 to 10 years of what sports is going to look like is going to be so markedly different than what it is today. And I know with Phaidra here and Anne here, we're not strangers. We know each other very well. Our work has overlapped in so many ways. And I would have to say, I'm going to kick it over to Phaidra at this point, because Phaidra, you sit in the middle of the work that Ann and I do. You are a board member, you sit on our advisory panel, our athlete advisory panel at the Women's Sports Foundation, and we have worked on a number of advocacy issues together, if it's regarding to trans athletes or other LGBTQ issues. And Phaidra, you have been a champion and a voice and a sounding voice of us working together.
Yeah, thank you. You're very on point there in terms of just how sport is such an instrument for change. And for me, I was born an activist, right? I remember having tons of heated discussions with my father, not to make him look like the bad person, but he was certainly a product of his time. And when he would talk about women in a derogatory way, which he didn't perceive it to be, as a 5-year-old, I was right there just, speaking out against it, and making my valid points. And so, for me, life, it's always been about trying to make sure we all have equality, whether we're Black, white, gay, straight, able-bodied or not. That's always been my thing. And my life has been sort of like everyone probably on this call, has been an evolution. And when I got to a place after I retired from, while I was playing rugby, I had an opportunity to go out and volunteer at Rikers Island with their high school, their boys' high school, through a friend that taught there. And I went out and I had an opportunity to teach these kids rugby, a little bit of rugby and a little bit of like high intensity interval training. And that for me was an eye opener that, I went to law school, I practiced law, and maybe there will be a use for that somewhere down the road, but I feel like my calling is something quite different. And I've known this since probably the day I had any sort of understanding or consciousness of being alive. I need to, work towards creating change in our juvenile detention center. I need to, stay true to the mission through my work with the Women's Sports Foundation, fighting for women's equality. And then I've obviously met Ann and through Athlete Ally, and obviously I'm LGBTQ. And so it was an opportunity to also fight for, equal rights and for LGBTQ plus people. And so, when I retired from rugby, I decided, I want to do this. I really want to launch this nonprofit. I had this, and Laura knows we talk a lot. I also had this love for fashion. We both share that. But I wanted to be able to do it in a way that had impact, right? Yeah, money is great, and money makes things happen in life. And so, working in a business and trying to generate money is one thing, but generating money so that I can really bring exposure and make a difference on some of these social justice issues is very important. Especially living in the country that we live in, right? Money talks, and that's sort of at the top of the hierarchy for many people. And so, the idea of creating a for-profit business with a very strong nonprofit mission is what really kind of got it, as I stated earlier, this PSK collective. And so, with that, I talk about it, that's very relevant to women, right, and girls. And our mission is to sell as many clothes as we possibly can so that we can fund and give back at least 15% of it to organizations that promote girls and women in sport. And currently, I'm proud to say that we're benefiting the Women's Sports Foundation. And I for this year, the plan is to continue to work with the Women's Sports Foundation and then to be able to expand as we grow to fund other organizations and to do their work. But, you know, it's really important. And you brought up Maya Moore, Lauren, the things that she's done, the sacrifices that she's made over the last year to help set a man free. Those are just, it's so selfless, right? She put her career on hold to do this. And so it's the least, you know, for me, I look at what I do and I'm in a position where, okay, I don't necessarily have to alter training and being an athlete, but I can also give back and create a way for other athletes, for other women to get exposure. And on that platform, really push the message of equality, really push the message of equal pay. Really with Peak Unleashed, push the message that these are kids, especially who haven't had equal opportunity from their start, right? And they had some really negative forces and sort of negative mentors, not mentors really, but influences in their lives. So they deserve a chance to have positivity and positive influences in their lives and to get a second chance, different trajectory on their lives. And so it's just great. It's a dream come true to be able to live my life, work for myself, but work for everyone else. And so it's just important. And I encourage everyone out there, you know, if your passion is to really get into social, you know, to be involved in mentoring and social justice and make that a full-time thing, you can do it. You know, it may require a bit of time, but you can take everything that you're doing and especially now in this very like crazy time, and make it what you want to make it. So yeah, sorry for rambling, but it's just, I'm just very grateful to be sitting where I'm sitting, to be able to serve. It's kind of like the servant leadership model, just to be able to give back and and pay it forward. It's a great thing.
I'm going to step in with just a little bit. I'm going to ramp it up to a little bit more of a controversial conversation here, because if we look at sports, you know, if we look at sports historically, let's go back to Maya Moore. Let's now talk about Natasha Cloud. Let's talk about all of these athletes, right? Women, LeBron James, athletes who are now, I mean, their actions are acting in ways of leaders and mentors, right? For a whole generation of people. Their generation, the upcoming generation, the generation before them. These are individuals stepping up. Historically, though, I work at the Women's Sports Foundation. We, to this day, work towards equity and equality, and you work towards equity and equality in human rights within LGBTQ issues. We're looking at governing bodies. We're looking at entities, entire organizations and entities who have, I don't want us to go as far as saying discredit, but have put a silence to people stepping up and stepping out. And when we look at the patriarch of what sports historically has been, it has caused, you know, I would probably have to say, difficulty for athletes to step out and really speak out because of the inability to feel that they will be supportive or that there won't be repercussions. And sometimes there's even policies in place with certain governing bodies, for instance, the IOC, where if you do make a political statement, if you do step up, then there will be consequences. And I'll stay in my lane talking about girls and women in sport. The thought of losing your entire life's work and your salary can be devastating. And so what this does is create a systemic, oftentimes silencing, and that happens now for anybody who buys in from the corporate side to the business side. So all that being said is, I mean, to your point, Phaidra, I think that it's so important to be here and to now be able to use your voice. And I think what we're seeing this changing, right? And I'm just going back to my original statement, is this change with athletes speaking up, and there's really no denial about the social injustice that the world in which we're living in is. We now are seeing for the first time ever leagues like the WNBA forward facing, saying we are standing with our athletes, and this season is geared towards social change. And that is a massive shift. And there's now, what I'm seeing is mentorship, and these are really big concepts and big things that are happening. We have a really large, powerful people coming into place. I mean, even the NASCAR is saying we are no longer standing for these things, and we are standing behind our athletes. And this is what I think is going to be the most powerful shift in sports. And there's going to be very little, if no gap, between allyship, activism, and athletics in the next 5 to 10 years. They are going to go one in one. And I think now corporations, sponsors, companies are really seeing that social equity is equitable. I wish we haven't had to get to that point, but that's the reality. And, I know just being in the space that, having to fight for these things, we hope that this will begin to advance what we've been working on.
Yeah. So it's a disruptive time. I agree with you. It's a time for major disruption, and on the front lines, I think sports and athletes are. And so, yeah, sorry, Ann, you need to speak.
No, I love where this conversation is going. And I think, we, in some of our prep calls, we were talking a little bit about the ways in which the narrative specifically about kneeling has changed, so that now athletes that aren't kneeling are being called into question to say, why are you not kneeling during the national anthem? And so it's amazing to see this changing tide and more support for athletes who are speaking up against social injustice in this country, and not confusing the messages of what the protests are actually supposed to be about, which is also really significant. And people have been waking up to the systemic brutality that Black Americans have been facing in this country for literal decades. And we're seeing a shift, and we're seeing even more athletes in leagues that traditionally haven't supported athlete activism speak up now and say enough is enough. And then those leagues have had to follow suit. And I think, we had mentioned previously that there were some NHL players that had made really significant statements. And it's important to note also that the WNBA has always led the way, and the WNBA athletes have led the way from the beginning. And again, I think we think about when some of the BLM protests started within the league, the pictures that were circulating was really primarily LeBron wearing the I Can't Breathe shirt, as opposed to the Minnesota Lynx who had started the protests. So it's also important, again, to the conversation we're already having, is that, female athletes have been the forefront of this movement, and specifically Black female athletes.
It's funny you say that. They're at the forefront, WNBA, but you got Maya Moore, who's arguably the best player in the league, and she makes her salary is a quarter of what LeBron makes.
She has to play 2 seasons.
One regular season game.
Yeah.
So, this is where the money part comes in, right? Like, it's great to have all this activism and all of these people shouting out and putting all these, statements, BLM statements and equity statements on your website in light of all the things that have sort of precipitated over the last few months. But money talks, and resources talk, and change talks, and actually media talks, right? So let's see more women's sports on television, right? Let's see, more money going into marketing efforts to really push it out there. I feel like, and I'm sorry to get fired up, but I just think even about, rugby. You know, we talk about being so inclusive as a sport, and we will hang our hats. We will die on the cross on these values and core, you know, these core values that govern our game. But at the end of the day, we're not paying here in the U.S. We certainly don't fund our women's team in the way that we fund our men's, and we don't make up the gap that maybe World Rugby, you know, creates from a commercial perspective. And so, you know, it's all good to you know, make statements and put things on your website and push out your agenda on social media. But at the end of the day, show me the money. Show me the money.
I'm with you. I'm with you, PK. And it's about paying athletes what they're actually worth. And it's also about, if you're going to send out, you know, if you're going to tweet, put something on IG, or send out an email to, you know, as a corporation or as a league to your supporters about how Black Lives Matter, then where is the money that you're going to support local Black-led organizations in your area? You know, so I think it's also about supporting organizations that have been doing this work for decades, and we all can hold our local, you know, sporting organizations, we can hold corporations accountable. You know, our money talks too. Where we spend our money does matter, and it matters even on an individual level. You know, and so if you are somebody who consumes a product and you see what they're putting out and you don't think they're actually putting resources toward social change work, say something.
I told you I was going to get things ramped up here.
With the fire.
And don't apologize. None of you apologize for getting fired up or turning things into this conversation, because this is what needs to happen. And that's the theme of this session, is about social movements. And you're tapping into that right now, is what turns the switch from being an individual or a collection of individuals to being a movement, is exactly what you all are talking about here. So Eli, I know we're really close to time.
I think maybe one or two questions, probably like 3 minutes, and then we can have a break. Maybe we'll do it at 5 more minutes, and then we'll have a 10-minute break.
Okay, great. So Eli told me that I would just need to get you all talking, and it would just take off from there.
It's gonna flow.
He didn't lie.
It's an amazing group. Amazing.
I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming in, and to all your benefit and credit, there weren't any questions until you turned this conversation, Lauren, so now they're all coming. Can you all comment? So we're talking specifically about individual athletes in the WNBA, but we're also talking about the NBA as a league and an organization, and the way that, for the most part, right, there's still a couple of detractors out there, but for the most part, the league has rallied around what makes a difference to its athletes. So what do you think could flip that switch in some of the other professional leagues? Why is it the WNBA that's standing out right now, and what can other leagues learn from or be mentored by the WNBA in terms of social justice issues?
I can start briefly, and then I know that you both will have more things to say. The WNBA and the NBA have more consistently supported their athletes when they've wanted to speak up and out on different social justice issues. And it also has been the athletes who have taken initiative to really say, we're going to organize amongst ourselves and do some kind of action, make a statement in really, really powerful ways. And, you know, without the athletes, sports doesn't happen. And so I think the more the athletes are able to connect with one another on these issues and actually organize and are not silenced, the more you're going to see systemic change. And, you know, again, Lauren, you mentioned NASCAR. You saw that with NASCAR, because these leagues know that athletes, you know, there are power in numbers, and the more athletes that speak up and make statements, the more they're going to have to listen, and the more the owners are going to have to listen.
Yeah, that's it. You know, and you said it, power in numbers. I think athletes traditionally in other sports, I think, yeah, like you said, basketball, professional basketball has probably done a really good job in terms of their athletes unifying and really being activists. When you get to some of these other sports that are a bit, at least like for rugby, a bit less prominent, and they're not in the limelight, so people just generally don't care. So folks feel like, they can't speak up. They get isolated. They are, operating under some really unfair sort of policies. And I'm not saying that specifically for rugby. I'm just saying in general for your non-mainstream sports. And so being able to it calls on mentorship, right? Having one person that speaks up and sort of starts the fire can be very contagious. And I've seen it just in the last few months with some of the, just in general, some of the rugby players on some issues just close to home with our organization. But just, I think education and information is everything. And when people know, and they have the confidence and feel like they're not isolated and they're not going to be retaliated against, that gives them power to really speak their voice. And so I think that's been incredible. And having kind of the fortification of really what seems like an entire nation to back people has been truly powerful.
The last thing I'll add to that is, my roots are in basketball. I happen to know personally David Stern, former commissioner of the NBA, who, really transformed the league. And one of the things that he championed the most, and he was most proud of, was his diversity and the diversity of the league, especially in the front office. And he's been on the record saying that if your organization or your company isn't diverse, then it deserves to fail. And I think that, you take that, as kind of one of, for years, just I think on the forefront of at least what they were trying to achieve. And then additionally, you flash forward here, I think you really have to look at the leadership of the league now, and I'll flip it to the women's side. I know Terry Jackson, the executive director of the PA, and prior to even their groundbreaking CBA that was just recently announced, came to the Women's Sports Foundation and was like, listen, the time for change is now. And a few months later, fully executed on what would be laying the groundwork for hopefully, other leagues and organizations moving forward. And then Kathy Engelberg on the league side, if you were to take a look at the leadership, and then especially in the Players Association from the WNBA side, the Agumake sisters, Leisha Clarendon, Sue Bird, these are incredible leaders. And that's where change starts, right? And that's where mentorship really begins. I'm David Stern on the NBA side. You have amazing leadership here. You have, Adam Silver now on the NBA side. When you really look at these leagues, and then the players on the NBA side, from LeBron and all those guys leading the way, mentorship, change, and I think really the fabric of what these leagues look like starts with the leadership and really taking it seriously. Really caring about your athletes, which is important.
Thank you all. I think you hit it there, right? The relationship between leading and mentoring, very closely connected, and that can come from the athlete level, that can come from the more executive level, as you mentioned, and that pressure that the athletes can place in number on the higher level leadership, but also that those higher level leaders that are in position right now believe that change is necessary and are in the positions to help make it happen. So I think it's time to wind up. I want to thank each of you, Lauren, Phaidra, Anne, for your time and your energy on the call, but in your everyday lives and everything that you do, personally and professionally. It was really great to have a couple of opportunities to talk with you and to hear more about what you're doing. And thanks for everything that you've contributed today to the forum as well.